Staff Sergeant Rebecca Becca Coleman had been stationed at Fort Carson for 8 months, but she might as well have been invisible. The Colorado morning sun streamed through the windows of the communications bunker as she adjusted her headset for another shift monitoring classified radio frequencies. Her fingers moved across the encryption controls with practiced precision, a skill that had taken her 3 years of intensive training to master. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The underground facility hummed with the constant white noise of electronic equipment and air filtration systems. Banks of monitors displayed streaming data from satellite feeds, radio intercepts, and encrypted communications channels that most people didn't even know existed. Becca's workspace occupied a corner station equipped with the most advanced signal analysis equipment the military had to offer, but to her fellow soldiers, she remained practically non-existent. At 26, Becca possessed an unusual gift that had caught the attention of military intelligence recruiters during her initial screening. She could identify individual voices with photographic precision, remembering not just accents and speech patterns, but subtle variations in breathing, vocal cord tension, and even emotional states that most people couldn't consciously detect. Her official military record listed her specialty as Communications Intelligence Analyst, but her real value lay in an ability that couldn't be quantified on paper. The morning briefing was scheduled for 800 hours in the main conference room, where Captain Williams would address the entire communications unit about new security protocols. Becca gathered her notes and walked through corridors lined with reinforced concrete walls, past security checkpoints that required both keycards and biometric scans. The facility's location beneath 50 feet of Colorado granite made it one of the most secure installations in North America. The conference room filled quickly with 32 members of the 25th Communications Battalion, their voices creating a low buzz of conversation about weekend plans and upcoming training exercises. Becca took her usual seat in the back corner, close enough to hear everything, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. She'd learned early in her military career that being noticed wasn't always a good thing, especially when you were one of only 6 women in a predominantly male unit. Captain Thomas Williams entered with his characteristic military bearing, his uniform pressed to perfection and his graying temples suggesting someone who'd spent decades earning his authority. He carried a leather portfolio containing the morning's intelligence briefings, documents that outlined potential threats to national security based on intercepted communications from hostile foreign agents. "Good morning, soldiers," Williams called out, as conversations gradually died down. The room settled into the familiar rhythm of military formality, with everyone straightening in their chairs and focusing their attention forward. Williams opened his portfolio and began pulling out papers, each one marked with various classification levels that indicated the sensitivity of their contents. "Before we begin today's briefing," he continued, "I'll conduct roll call to ensure we have proper accountability for classified information distribution." This was standard procedure for meetings involving sensitive intelligence, but the process always made Becca's stomach tighten with anticipation and dread. Williams began reading names from his roster, each soldier responding with a crisp, "Present, sir," that echoed off the concrete walls. The responses came in alphabetical order, creating a predictable rhythm that would eventually reach her name. Becca watched as her fellow soldiers straightened and spoke when called, their voices carrying confidence and belonging that she envied. "Sergeant Anderson," Williams called out, his eyes scanning the room until they found the tall red-headed woman in the third row. "Present, sir," came the immediate response. The process continued through names like Martinez, Johnson, and Patterson, each acknowledgement reinforcing the solid chain of command that held their unit together. When Williams reached Staff Sergeant Coleman, his eyes swept across the room with practiced efficiency, but somehow managed to look right past her raised hand. She sat perfectly still, her arm extended at regulation angle, waiting for him to notice her. The silence stretched for several seconds as his gaze continued searching, apparently unable to locate the source of her raised hand. "Staff Sergeant Coleman," he called again, this time with a slight edge of impatience, as if she were late or absent rather than sitting directly in his line of sight. Several soldiers began turning in their seats, following Williams' searching gaze around the room, while Becca remained motionless with her hand still raised.
"Present, sir," she responded clearly, her voice carrying across the room with unmistakable clarity. But Williams had already moved on to the next name on his list, apparently satisfied that he'd completed the roll call despite never actually acknowledging her response. The incident lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity to Becca, who slowly lowered her hand while heat rose in her cheeks. Specialist Davis, a 19-year-old communications technician sitting 2 rows ahead, turned around with a barely concealed smirk. He'd been at Fort Carson for only 6 weeks, having arrived straight from basic training with the confidence that comes from youth and inexperience. His amusement at Becca's situation was obvious to everyone nearby, and she could see other junior soldiers exchanging glances that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd witnessed such treatment. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Becca. She possessed security clearances that most of the soldiers in the room would never achieve, had access to intelligence that could affect national security decisions, and maintained responsibility for monitoring communications that could prevent terrorist attacks or foreign espionage. Her specialized training had taken place at the Defense Language Institute in California, where she'd spent 18 months learning to identify speakers across multiple languages and dialects. The program had pushed her to develop not just technical skills, but an almost supernatural ability to recognize human vocal patterns under the most challenging conditions. She could identify a speaker through static, encryption artifacts, or even deliberate voice disguise techniques. Following her advanced training, Becca had been assigned to a classified program that monitored international communications for threats against American interests. Her daily responsibilities included analyzing intercepted phone calls, radio transmissions, and encrypted messages from foreign intelligence agents. She'd successfully identified numerous speakers involved in planning activities that posed direct threats to American military personnel overseas. The work required absolute precision and unwavering attention to detail. A single misidentified voice could lead to intelligence failures with catastrophic consequences, while accurate identification could prevent attacks and save lives. Becca had built a reputation among intelligence analysts for her reliability and accuracy, earning commendations that remained classified and therefore invisible to her immediate supervisors. Despite her critical role in national security operations, Becca found herself marginalized within her own unit. The complex nature of her work made it difficult for others to understand or appreciate her contributions. Unlike soldiers whose jobs involved visible, tangible results, her successes remained hidden behind layers of classification that prevented her from discussing them with anyone lacking appropriate security clearances. The morning briefing continued with Williams discussing new encryption protocols and updated security procedures, information that would directly affect Becca's daily operations. She took detailed notes while simultaneously analyzing the voices around her, a habit that had become second nature after years of intensive training. She could identify each speaker without looking, categorizing their emotional states, stress levels, and even detecting subtle lies or deceptions in their vocal patterns. As Williams concluded his presentation, Becca realized that her unique abilities, which made her invaluable to national security operations, had somehow made her invisible to the people she worked alongside every day. The same skills that allowed her to identify enemy agents from thousands of miles away seemed to have rendered her unrecognizable to her own commanding officer during a simple roll call. The morning sun climbed higher outside the bunker as soldiers began filing out of the conference room, returning to their various assignments throughout the facility. Becca remained in her seat for a few extra moments, gathering her thoughts and preparing for another day of critical work that would remain unacknowledged by the people around her. She had no idea that her exceptional abilities would soon be put to a test that would change everything.
The weeks following the roll call incident established a disturbing pattern that seemed to follow Becca wherever she went within the Fort Carson facility. Her shift supervisor, Technical Sergeant Marcus Chen, had developed an almost supernatural ability to look through her during daily briefings. Chen, a 15-year veteran with an impressive record in conventional communications, seemed genuinely baffled by the specialized nature of Becca's work and chose to deal with his confusion by pretending she didn't exist. During the Tuesday morning shift change briefing, Becca attempted to report an unusual pattern she detected in encrypted transmissions from a known terrorist cell operating in Eastern Europe. The intercept suggested coordination for a potential attack on American diplomatic facilities, information that required immediate escalation to higher command levels.
She'd spent the previous night analyzing voice patterns and had positively identified 3 high-value targets who were believed to be planning something significant. "Sergeant Chen," she began, raising her hand during the appropriate portion of the briefing, "I need to report priority intelligence regarding the Scorpion Network. I've identified confirmed voices discussing operational timelines that suggest imminent action against American interests." Chen's eyes swept across the room as if searching for the source of the voice, even though Becca sat directly in front of him at the second-row center seat. His gaze passed over her twice before settling on Specialist Rodriguez, who sat 3 seats to her left and looked equally confused by the attention. "Rodriguez, did you have something to report?" Chen asked, his voice carrying the tired patience of someone dealing with junior personnel. Rodriguez shook his head quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the misplaced attention, while Becca remained frozen with her hand still raised and her intelligence report hanging undelivered in the air between them. "I have critical intelligence that requires immediate escalation," Becca repeated, this time speaking louder to ensure her voice carried clearly across the room. Several soldiers turned to look at her, confirming that she was audible and visible to everyone except the person who needed to hear her most. Chen frowned and consulted his notes, apparently convinced that someone in the room was trying to communicate with him, but unable to identify the source. "If anyone has intelligence to report, please see me after the briefing," he announced to the room in general, then continued with his prepared remarks about equipment maintenance schedules.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Scorpion Network intelligence sat undelivered while Chen discussed routine administrative matters that could have been handled through email. Becca watched precious minutes tick by, knowing that terrorist organizations operated on compressed timelines and that delays in intelligence sharing could mean the difference between preventing an attack and responding to its aftermath. After the briefing ended, Becca approached Chen's desk with her written analysis and voice identification reports. The documents contained detailed technical information about frequency analysis, vocal pattern recognition, and cross-reference databases that had taken her most of the night to compile. She placed the papers directly in front of him, ensuring they couldn't be overlooked or misplaced. "Sergeant Chen, this intelligence requires immediate attention," she said, pointing to the classification markings that indicated the sensitive nature of her findings. "I've positively identified 3 Priority 1 targets discussing operational coordination. The voice analysis indicates high stress levels consistent with pre-operational planning phases." Chen looked down at the papers, then up at the empty space slightly to the left of where Becca stood, as if expecting to see someone else. His expression showed genuine confusion, as though the documents had materialized through some supernatural phenomenon, rather than being delivered by a soldier standing directly in front of him. "Where did these come from?" he asked, picking up the papers and examining them with the puzzled expression of someone trying to solve an impossible riddle. The classification stamps and technical analysis were clearly visible, along with Becca's name and signature on every page, but Chen seemed unable to connect the documents with their obvious source. "I compiled this analysis during my night shift," Becca explained, maintaining her professional composure despite the surreal nature of the conversation. "The voice identification data confirms 3 high-value targets discussing coordination for what appears to be an imminent operation against American diplomatic targets." Chen continued studying the documents, while apparently remaining unaware that someone was speaking to him. He flipped through the pages, reading the technical analysis with growing interest, but his eyes never focused on Becca's face or acknowledged her presence in any way. After several minutes of this bizarre interaction, he placed the papers in his outgoing intelligence folder without comment and returned to his computer screen. The pattern extended beyond her immediate supervisors to include virtually every level of command within the communications battalion. During a facility-wide security briefing the following week, Colonel Patricia Hayes addressed the assembled personnel about increased threat levels and the need for enhanced vigilance in monitoring hostile communications.
The briefing covered exactly the type of intelligence that Becca specialized in analyzing, yet she remained completely invisible to the person delivering the information. Colonel Hayes, a decorated intelligence officer with 22 years of military service, had built her reputation on attention to detail and thorough knowledge of her personnel. Her briefing emphasized the critical importance of voice identification in modern intelligence operations, describing it as one of the most valuable tools available for tracking terrorist networks and preventing attacks on American interests. The enemy relies on communications to coordinate their operations, Hayes explained to the assembled soldiers. Our ability to identify key personnel through voice analysis has prevented dozens of attacks over the past year alone. Every analyst in this room plays a crucial role in protecting American lives through their expertise and dedication. Becca listened to this praise for her exact specialty while remaining invisible to the colonel who was delivering it. The irony felt crushing as Hayes continued describing the vital importance of the work that Becca performed every day, work that had indeed prevented attacks and saved lives, while simultaneously being unable to see the person responsible for many of those successes. During the question period following Hayes's presentation, Becca raised her hand to share information about recent voice identification successes that might be relevant to the briefing. She had specific examples of terrorist communications that had been disrupted through her analysis, cases where her unique abilities had provided actionable intelligence that prevented attacks on American diplomatic facilities. Hayes looked directly at Becca's raised hand for several seconds, then announced that there appeared to be no questions from the audience and concluded the briefing. The dismissal felt like a physical blow, especially since Hayes had just spent 30 minutes describing the exact type of work that Becca excelled at performing. The social dynamics within the unit created additional layers of isolation that compounded the professional dismissal she experienced from supervisors. During mealtimes in the facility cafeteria, conversations would pause when she approached, not from hostility, but from a strange inability to perceive her presence. Soldiers would discuss classified operations that directly related to her work while she sat at the same table, apparently invisible to their awareness. Specialist Thompson, a communications technician who'd been at Fort Carson for 2 years, regularly complained about the workload in the voice analysis department. He'd sit across from Becca during lunch breaks, describing the overwhelming amount of intercepted communications that needed analysis and the shortage of qualified personnel to handle the volume. "We're drowning in intercepts," Thompson would say to his fellow specialists. "Command keeps asking for voice identification on these terrorist networks, but we don't have anyone with the advanced training to handle the complex cases. We need someone who can identify speakers through encryption artifacts and voice disguise techniques." Becca would listen to these conversations while eating her lunch, knowing that she possessed exactly the expertise Thompson was describing. Her training at the Defense Language Institute had specifically focused on the advanced techniques he mentioned, and her daily work involved precisely the type of analysis he claimed was impossible with current staffing levels. The disconnect between perception and reality created a frustrating cycle where critical intelligence remained unshared despite being generated by someone sitting in the same room as the people who needed it. Security protocols added another dimension to her invisibility problem. The facility's access control systems relied on both electronic key cards and human recognition for the most sensitive areas. Guards at checkpoint stations would scan Becca's credentials and verify her clearance levels through their computer systems, confirming her authorization to access classified areas, but they seemed unable to form any memory of the interaction. Staff Sergeant Williams, who managed security for the Classified Communications Center, checked Becca's credentials multiple times per day as she moved between different work areas. Each interaction followed the same pattern. He would scan her badge, verify her clearances, grant her access, and then immediately forget that the interaction had occurred. The next time she approached his checkpoint, even minutes later, he would treat her as though it were their first encounter of the day. This security checkpoint amnesia created practical problems that went beyond mere inconvenience. During emergency protocols that required rapid movement of personnel, Williams would count heads and consistently come one person short, unable to account for Becca's presence despite having cleared her through his checkpoint multiple times. The administrative impact of her invisibility began affecting her military record in subtle but significant ways. Performance evaluations that should have reflected her critical contributions to national security operations instead contained generic language about routine communications support. Her supervisors appeared genuinely unable to recall specific examples of her work, despite the fact that her voice identification reports had been instrumental in several major intelligence successes. Master Sergeant Davis, who was responsible for compiling annual performance reviews, scheduled Becca's evaluation meeting 3 times before finally conducting it. Each previous appointment had been forgotten or rescheduled because Davis couldn't remember who the meeting was supposed to be with, despite having Becca's name written in his appointment calendar and her personnel file sitting on his desk.
During the actual evaluation meeting, Davis struggled to discuss Becca's performance because he couldn't recall any specific instances of her work or contributions. He flipped through her file, reading commendations from intelligence agencies and letters of appreciation from overseas commanders, but seemed unable to connect these achievements with the person sitting across from his desk. These records indicate exceptional performance in voice analysis and counterterrorism operations, Davis said, reading from documents that clearly bore Becca's name and signature, but I'm having trouble recalling specific examples to discuss. Perhaps you could refresh my memory about your recent accomplishments. The surreal nature of describing her own classified achievements to someone who had access to detailed records of those same achievements highlighted the bizarre reality of Becca's situation. She found herself in the position of advocating for recognition of work that was already documented in her official record, work that had earned praise from intelligence agencies that most soldiers would never interact with during their entire careers. By the end of her 8th month at Fort Carson, Becca had established a clear pattern of professional excellence accompanied by complete personal invisibility. Her voice identification work had contributed to preventing 4 separate terrorist attacks. Her analysis had identified 12 high-value targets on international watch lists, and her technical innovations had improved the facility's intercept capabilities by 30%. Yet none of these achievements translated into recognition or acknowledgement from the people she worked alongside every day. The isolation created by this paradox was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Becca found herself questioning her own perception of reality, wondering whether she was somehow imagining her contributions or misunderstanding her role within the unit. The disconnect between documented success and personal invisibility created a psychological burden that no military training had prepared her to handle. As she prepared for another night shift monitoring classified communications channels, Becca had no way of knowing that her unique voice identification abilities were about to be tested in a way that would finally force her colleagues to confront the reality of her existence and expertise. The intercepted transmission came through at 0347 hours on a Wednesday morning, crackling through the encrypted channels with an urgency that made Becca's pulse quicken. She was alone in the communications bunker during the graveyard shift, surrounded by banks of monitoring equipment that hummed quietly in the underground facility. The voice that emerged from the static was one she'd been tracking for 6 months across multiple intelligence networks, a voice that belonged to someone the CIA had designated as Ghost 7. Ghost 7 was the operational codename for Viktor Kozlov, a former Russian Spetsnaz operative who'd gone rogue and now sold his services to the highest bidder among international terrorist organizations. His voice had appeared in intercepted communications linked to attacks in 3 different countries, always speaking in coded language that intelligence analysts struggled to decipher. But Becca had developed an intimate familiarity with his vocal patterns. The slight rasp that came from a throat injury sustained during his military service, and the precise way he pronounced certain syllables that betrayed his origins in the Ural Mountains region. The transmission was brief, lasting only 47 seconds, but it contained information that made Becca's blood run cold.
Speaking in what appeared to be casual conversation about a family reunion, Ghost 7 was actually coordinating the final details of an operation called Harvest Moon. The coded language referenced timing, locations, and personnel in ways that would sound innocent to casual listeners but carry deadly meaning for someone trained in intelligence analysis. Becca's fingers flew across her workstation as she initiated multiple recording protocols and began real-time analysis of the transmission. The voice identification software confirmed what her trained ear had already recognized. This was definitely Ghost 7, speaking with the elevated stress patterns that indicated an operation in its final planning stages. But the conversation also included two other voices she hadn't heard before. Speakers who were discussing logistics with the professional precision of experienced operatives. The first unknown voice belonged to a woman, speaking accented English with linguistic markers suggesting origins in the Middle East, possibly Lebanon or Syria. Her vocal patterns indicated advanced education and tactical training, someone comfortable discussing complex operational details under pressure. The second voice was male, speaking with the clipped precision of former military personnel, most likely American based on his accent and terminology choices. What terrified Becca was the operational timeline they were discussing. Using agricultural metaphors to disguise their true meaning, the three operatives were coordinating an attack scheduled for the following weekend. The target appeared to be a harvest festival, code language that intelligence databases associated with large public gatherings where maximum casualties could be achieved with minimal resources. The location references were more subtle, requiring deep knowledge of terrorist communication patterns to decode. They mentioned the old barn where grandfather used to work, which Becca recognized as a reference to historic government buildings. Additional clues about bringing the whole family together suggested a gathering of multiple terrorist cells for a coordinated strike that would involve dozens of operatives working simultaneously. As the transmission ended, Becca immediately began cross-referencing the voice patterns with existing intelligence databases, searching for any previous appearances of the two unknown speakers. The woman's voice triggered partial matches in communications intercepts from terrorist cells operating in Lebanon and Jordan, while the male voice showed similarities to intercepts from domestic extremist groups that had been linked to several bombing attempts over the past 2 years. The implications were staggering. Ghost 7 had apparently coordinated a meeting between international terrorist operatives and domestic extremists, creating a hybrid cell with capabilities that intelligence agencies had previously encountered. The operational sophistication suggested months of planning and resources that indicated state-level sponsorship from hostile foreign governments. Becca spent the next 3 hours conducting detailed analysis of every aspect of the transmission. She ran the voices through spectral analysis software that could detect subtle variations invisible to human perception, confirming her initial identifications and discovering additional details about the speakers' backgrounds and training. The technical analysis revealed sophisticated counter-surveillance techniques that suggested all three operatives had received advanced training in avoiding detection. The most disturbing discovery came when she analyzed background audio from the transmission. Careful frequency filtering revealed ambient sounds that provided crucial intelligence about the operative's location. She could identify specific aircraft engine signatures consistent with military transport planes, suggesting the meeting was taking place near an active airbase. Additional audio analysis revealed construction equipment sounds that matched ongoing projects at 3 potential target locations.
By 6:30 hours, Becca had compiled a comprehensive intelligence package that included voice identification confirmations, operational timeline analysis, target assessment, and location intelligence that could enable law enforcement agencies to prevent what appeared to be the most significant terrorist attack planned on American soil since September 11th. The documentation filled 47 pages of technical analysis, supported by audio samples, spectral analysis charts, and cross-references to existing intelligence databases. Her first attempt to report the discovery came during the morning shift change briefing with Technical Sergeant Chen. Becca arrived at the conference room 30 minutes early, carrying printed copies of her analysis along with secure digital files that contained the actual audio intercepts. She'd organized the information to provide both executive summary details for quick decision-making and comprehensive technical data for intelligence professionals who would need to verify her conclusions. "Sergeant Chen," she began as he entered the conference room, "I have critical intelligence that requires immediate escalation to command level. I've intercepted and analyzed communications indicating a major terrorist attack planned for this weekend. The operation involves international operatives coordinating with domestic extremist cells, and we have a narrow window to prevent it." Chen looked around the conference room with obvious confusion, apparently hearing voices but unable to locate their source. He checked his watch, consulted his notes, and eventually sat down at the head of the table, while Becca remained standing directly in front of him with her intelligence package clearly visible. "I've positively identified 3 operatives, including Ghost 7, who is coordinating with previously unknown cells," Becca continued, speaking louder to ensure clarity. "The target appears to be a large public gathering this weekend, and the sophistication of their planning suggests state-level sponsorship. This requires immediate action from counterterrorism units." Chen frowned and looked at the papers Becca had placed on the table in front of him, picking them up with the puzzled expression of someone discovering mysterious documents that had appeared without explanation. He flipped through the pages, reading the technical analysis and voice identification data, but his eyes never focused on Becca, despite her standing less than 3 feet away from him. "Where did this intelligence come from?" Chen asked the empty conference room, apparently expecting someone to materialize and explain the situation. The classified markings and technical sophistication of the analysis clearly indicated professional intelligence work, but Chen seemed unable to connect the documents with their obvious source. Becca tried for 20 minutes to explain the situation, providing detailed technical explanations of her analysis methodology and the urgent timeline for preventing the attack. Chen continued reading the documents with growing alarm, recognizing the quality and importance of the intelligence, but remaining completely unable to perceive the person delivering the information. Eventually, Chen gathered the papers and left the conference room without acknowledging Becca's presence, presumably to deliver the intelligence through proper channels. But Becca knew from previous experience that documents without a clear chain of custody would likely be delayed or questioned, potentially long enough for the terrorist operation to proceed as planned. Her second attempt came through the electronic intelligence reporting system, a secure network that allowed analysts to submit time-sensitive information directly to command levels. Becca logged into the system using her classified credentials and uploaded her complete analysis, including audio files and supporting documentation. The system required detailed authentication and chain of custody information, all of which she provided according to standard protocols. The electronic submission system generated an automatic receipt confirming that her intelligence package had been received and assigned a priority classification based on its content. The algorithms that analyzed her report identified multiple keywords and threat indicators that should have triggered immediate escalation to counterterrorism specialists. Within the secure network, her analysis was properly attributed to her name and credentials, creating a clear electronic record of her discovery and expertise. But when Becca followed up through official channels, she discovered that human reviewers who processed the electronic submissions had somehow overlooked her report entirely. The automated systems had correctly identified the intelligence as high priority, but the people responsible for acting on that intelligence seemed unable to perceive its existence, just as they remained unable to perceive Becca herself. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the facility's intelligence officer, had received electronic notification of Becca's submission, but appeared unable to locate the actual files in his system. During a phone conversation with regional counterterrorism coordinators, Morrison mentioned receiving notification of critical intelligence but expressed confusion about its source and location within the secure network. "I'm showing a high-priority submission in my queue," Morrison told his contacts at the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, "but I can't seem to access the actual files. The system indicates voice identification intelligence about a major planned attack, but the documents aren't appearing in my interface. This might be a technical glitch, but I don't want to ignore potential threat information." Becca listened to this conversation through secure monitoring channels, knowing that her intelligence package was sitting in Morrison's system exactly where it should be, properly classified and readily accessible through standard procedures. The technical systems were working perfectly. It was the human element that was failing to function, creating a bizarre situation where critical intelligence existed within the system but remained invisible to the people who needed to act on it. Her third attempt involved bypassing normal chains of command and contacting counter-terrorist agencies directly through emergency protocols. The FBI's National Security Branch maintained 24-hour hotlines for reporting imminent threats, and Becca used her security clearances to access those emergency contact systems. She prepared a streamlined version of her intelligence package that focused on the most critical information: confirmed terrorist operatives, planned attack timeline, and potential target locations. The FBI analyst who took her call, Special Agent Patricia Williams, listened carefully as Becca explained her discovery and provided authentication codes that confirmed her security clearances and credentials. Williams asked detailed questions about the voice identification process and requested technical specifications that demonstrated Becca's expertise in the field. This intelligence could prevent a major attack, Williams acknowledged after reviewing her credentials and analysis methodology. "I'm going to patch you through to our crisis response team so you can brief them directly. Hold the line while I conference with the appropriate personnel." For several minutes, Becca felt hopeful that her intelligence would finally reach people who could act on it effectively. Williams had recognized the quality and importance of her discovery, and the FBI's crisis response team had the authority and resources to coordinate prevention efforts with multiple agencies. But when Williams attempted to transfer the call, something inexplicable happened. The FBI systems showed no record of the conversation, despite Williams having logged detailed notes about the intelligence and Becca's credentials. When Williams tried to locate Becca's contact information, she discovered that her computer showed no record of any call having taken place. Agent Williams found herself staring at blank log files and empty communication records, unable to explain how she had detailed notes about a conversation that apparently never occurred according to her agency's documentation systems. The technical impossibility of the situation left her confused and concerned, but without any clear path forward for acting on intelligence that she could remember receiving but couldn't prove existed. As Thursday morning arrived, Becca realized that her 3 attempts to report the most significant intelligence discovery of her career had all failed through the same inexplicable phenomenon that made her invisible to her colleagues. Somewhere in America, terrorist operatives were making final preparations for an attack that could kill hundreds of people, while the one person who had uncovered their plans remained unable to communicate that knowledge to anyone with the authority to stop them. The weekend deadline was approaching rapidly, and Becca knew that time was running out to prevent a catastrophe that she alone had the power to stop. Her unique voice identification abilities had uncovered intelligence that could save lives, but those same abilities seemed cursed to remain unrecognized by the very people who needed them most. Friday morning brought chaos to Fort Carson that shattered the routine of military precision like an earthquake through a crystal cathedral. At 05:47 hours, emergency sirens began wailing across the facility as reports flooded in from multiple intelligence agencies about coordinated terrorist activities detected across the western United States. The Crisis Operations Center activated to full capacity within minutes, with personnel rushing to their emergency stations while secure communication lines buzzed with urgent traffic from the Pentagon, FBI headquarters, and NSA facilities. Becca was in the middle of her regular shift monitoring overseas communications when the facility's automated alert system activated every screen and speaker throughout the underground complex. The calm, computerized voice that delivered emergency announcements carried a message that made her stomach drop. All personnel report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Condition red protocols are now in effect. Repeat, this is not a drill. The communications bunker transformed into a hurricane of activity as specialists rushed to activate emergency monitoring protocols that expanded their surveillance capabilities to maximum levels.
Banks of additional equipment powered up with electronic whirs and clicks, while overhead displays that normally showed routine status information switched to threat assessment matrices that painted an alarming picture of coordinated hostile activity. Major Elizabeth Reeves, the facility's emergency operations coordinator, burst into the communications center carrying multiple secure tablets displaying real-time intelligence feeds from agencies across the government. Her normally composed demeanor showed cracks of stress as she began briefing the assembled personnel about a situation that was unfolding faster than their standard response protocols could handle. "We've received credible intelligence indicating multiple terrorist cells are preparing coordinated attacks across several states," Reeves announced, her voice carrying the weight of someone delivering potentially catastrophic news. FBI field offices in Denver, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City have reported unusual activity consistent with pre-operational surveillance. NSA algorithms have detected communication spikes among known extremist networks, and CIA assets overseas are reporting accelerated planning among international terrorist organizations. Becca listened to this briefing with growing horror, recognizing elements that directly corresponded to the intelligence she'd discovered Wednesday night. The geographic locations mentioned by Major Reeves aligned perfectly with the operational area she'd identified through her analysis of Ghost 7's communications. The timing matched the weekend deadline she'd determined from the coded agricultural references. Even the mention of international and domestic coordination reflected the hybrid cell structure she'd identified. "The threat appears to involve simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm our response capabilities," Reeves continued, reading from classified briefings that scrolled across her secure tablet. "Intelligence indicates sophisticated coordination between foreign operatives and domestic extremist groups, suggesting months of advanced planning and significant financial backing." Technical Sergeant Chen, who had been promoted to Emergency Communications Supervisor for the crisis, began assigning monitoring responsibilities to the assembled personnel. His face showed the strain of someone thrust into a leadership role during the most serious emergency of his career. The routine confidence he displayed during normal operations had been replaced by barely controlled panic as he struggled to coordinate resources for a situation that exceeded his training and experience. "Rodriguez, I need you monitoring all domestic law enforcement frequencies," Chen commanded, his voice cracking slightly under pressure. "Thompson, take international terrorist networks. Williams, focus on suspected sleeper cell communications in the Rocky Mountain region." As Chen continued assigning responsibilities, Becca realized he was overlooking the most critical monitoring assignment, tracking the specific operatives whose communications had revealed the plot in the first place. Ghost 7's voice signature was the key to intercepting final coordination calls that could reveal exact timing and target information, but Chen's assignments didn't include anyone with the specialized training needed to identify those vocal patterns under emergency conditions. "Sergeant Chen," Becca called out, raising her hand while stepping forward from her monitoring station. Chen looked around the communications center with obvious frustration, apparently hearing voices but unable to locate their source during the chaos of emergency activation. Multiple personnel were speaking simultaneously as they set up their monitoring stations, creating an acoustic environment that made individual voices difficult to isolate. But Becca was standing directly in front of him, speaking clearly and loud enough to be heard over the background noise. "I've already identified 3 key operatives, including the primary coordinator," Becca continued, pulling out printed copies of her Wednesday night analysis. "My technical analysis indicates they're planning attacks for this weekend, and I can provide specific voice signatures that will allow us to intercept their final coordination calls." The intelligence package she'd prepared contained exactly the information that Major Reeves had said was critically needed: operational timelines, coordination patterns, and technical details about the terrorist communication methods. But Chen continued looking around the room as if the voices were coming from some invisible source, unable to connect Becca's clear statements with the person delivering them. Meanwhile, the situation deteriorated rapidly as reports continued flooding in from field offices across the country. FBI surveillance teams in Denver reported losing contact with suspected operatives who had been under observation for weeks. The suspects had apparently detected the surveillance and gone underground, using counter-surveillance techniques that suggested professional training in avoiding law enforcement detection. In Phoenix, local police had discovered abandoned safe houses that showed evidence of recent occupation by multiple individuals. Forensic teams found traces of explosive materials and electronic equipment consistent with bomb-making activities, along with maps of potential target locations that included shopping centers, sports venues, and government buildings. The scope of the preparation indicated an operation far more sophisticated than typical domestic terrorism attempts. Salt Lake City field agents reported similar discoveries, with the additional alarming detail that international travel records showed multiple foreign nationals had entered the area using documentation that might have been falsified. Immigration databases showed discrepancies in the backgrounds of several individuals who had arrived during the past month, suggesting a level of document forgery that required state-level resources. The Crisis Operations Center's main display screen began showing a real-time map of suspicious activities across the western United States. Red indicators marked locations where law enforcement had detected potential terrorist preparations, while yellow markers showed areas where surveillance had detected unusual communication patterns or movement of suspected operatives. The pattern emerging on the map painted a picture of coordinated activity that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of potential participants. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Fort Carson's commanding officer, arrived in the communications center accompanied by her senior staff and representatives from multiple federal agencies. Her presence indicated that the situation had escalated to the highest levels of military and civilian leadership, with coordination involving resources from across the intelligence community. Status report, Mitchell commanded as she surveyed the communications center's emergency configuration. The colonel's 40-year military career included command positions during several international crises, but the tension in her voice suggested this situation was testing even her extensive experience. Major Reeves stepped forward with her secure tablet displaying the latest intelligence summaries. "Ma'am, we're tracking coordinated terrorist activity across multiple states involving both international operatives and domestic extremist cells. The threat appears to involve simultaneous attacks planned for this weekend, but we're lacking specific target information and operational timelines. What are our capabilities for intercepting their final coordination communications?" Mitchell asked, scanning the room filled with monitoring equipment and technical personnel. "If they're planning weekend attacks, they'll need to communicate final details within the next 24 hours. Chen stepped forward nervously, clearly uncomfortable briefing senior leadership during a crisis situation. "Ma'am, we have personnel monitoring all known terrorist communication channels and frequencies. We're running voice recognition software on all intercepts, but we haven't identified specific operatives involved in the current threat." Becca watched this exchange with mounting frustration, knowing that she possessed exactly the information Colonel Mitchell was requesting. Her analysis had identified the specific operatives, their communication patterns, and their likely coordination schedule. She had voice signatures that could enable targeted monitoring instead of the broad-spectrum approach that was currently overwhelming their analytical capabilities. "Colonel Mitchell," Becca called out, stepping forward with her intelligence package clearly visible. "I have specific voice identification on the primary coordination team. I've been tracking their communications for 6 months and intercepted their planning session Wednesday night. I can provide technical analysis that will enable targeted monitoring of their final coordination calls." Mitchell looked directly at Becca for several seconds, her experienced eyes scanning the communication center as if searching for the voice she was hearing. The colonel's expression showed the focused concentration of someone trying to process critical information during a crisis. But her gaze passed over Becca without recognition despite looking directly at her. "Do we have any analysts with specific intelligence about the current threat?" Mitchell asked Chen, apparently unaware that the answer to her question was standing 3 feet away, holding the exact intelligence she needed. The disconnect between critical need and available expertise was becoming a catastrophic failure of communication that could cost hundreds of lives. Emergency protocols designed to handle crisis situations were functioning perfectly at the technical level, but the human element was failing in ways that no one had anticipated or planned for. As Friday afternoon progressed, the crisis continued escalating without benefit of the intelligence that could have provided crucial guidance for prevention efforts. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states were operating with incomplete information, searching for terrorist operatives whose identities and communication patterns Becca had already determined. Counter-terrorism units were preparing for potential attacks without knowing the specific targets that her analysis had revealed. The most frustrating aspect of the situation was watching highly trained professionals struggle with problems that she had already solved. Intelligence analysts were running complex algorithms to identify terrorist communication patterns, while Becca stood nearby with hand-coded analysis that had already achieved those results. Technology specialists were trying to enhance voice recognition capabilities, while she possessed the human expertise to identify specific operatives by ear. By 1600 hours, reports indicated that the terrorist cells had gone completely silent, ceasing all electronic communications as they moved into final operational phases. This communication blackout was exactly what Becca had predicted based on her analysis of their planning timeline, but her warnings had never reached the people who could have used that information to intercept final coordination calls before the blackout began. The Crisis Operations Center settled into the tense waiting period that preceded major terrorist attacks, with hundreds of law enforcement and military personnel positioned to respond to threats they couldn't specifically identify or locate. Across the western United States, innocent people were going about their Friday evening activities unaware that they might be targets of the most sophisticated terrorist operation ever attempted on American soil. As the sun set over Colorado, casting long shadows across Fort Carson's facilities, Becca realized that her unique abilities and critical intelligence would remain invisible right up until the moment when they were desperately needed. The weekend that could bring catastrophic attacks was beginning, and she was the only person who knew exactly what was coming and when it would happen. Captain Daniel "Iron Eagle" Harrison arrived at Fort Carson at 21:30 Friday night, his black sedan cutting through the darkness toward the underground facility with the urgency of someone carrying the weight of national security on his shoulders. Harrison was a legend within military intelligence circles, a 30-year veteran whose career had spanned operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and classified missions that officially never happened. His nickname came from his uncanny ability to spot critical details that others missed, and his reputation for making impossible decisions under pressure that consistently saved American lives. At 52, Harrison carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who had earned respect through competence rather than politics. His weathered face bore the subtle scars of operations conducted in hostile territory, while his steel-gray eyes held the sharp focus of someone trained to process complex information instantly and act on incomplete data when lives hung in the balance. Tonight, those skills would be tested by a crisis that threatened to become the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. Harrison had been pulled from a classified operation in Eastern Europe when intelligence algorithms detected communication patterns that matched his expertise in international terrorist networks. The Pentagon's crisis response team had specifically requested his involvement because the current threat showed characteristics of hybrid operations that combined foreign training with domestic resources. Exactly the type of complex scenario that Harrison had spent his career learning to counter. The captain carried with him a secure briefcase containing the latest intelligence summaries from agencies across the government, along with classified analysis from international partners who had detected related activities in their own territories. European intelligence services had intercepted communications suggesting that the American operation was part of a larger international campaign designed to test Western response capabilities and identify vulnerabilities in cross-border coordination.
As Harrison descended into the communications bunker, he immediately sensed the controlled chaos that indicated a crisis operation running at maximum capacity. The facility hummed with electronic activity as specialists monitored hundreds of communication channels simultaneously, searching for any sign of terrorist coordination that could provide advance warning of specific attacks. Multiple secure phone lines carried urgent conversations with FBI field offices, NSA analysts, and international intelligence partners who were sharing real-time information about suspicious activities. Colonel Mitchell briefed Harrison in the secure conference room adjacent to the main communication center, spreading classified documents across the table while secure video screens displayed real-time intelligence feeds from across the country. The briefing painted an alarming picture of coordinated terrorist activities that exceeded anything in previous threat assessments, with evidence suggesting state-level sponsorship and months of advanced planning. "Captain Harrison," Mitchell began, her voice carrying the weight of someone reporting potentially catastrophic developments. "We're facing what appears to be the most sophisticated terrorist operation ever attempted on American soil. Intelligence indicates coordination between international operatives and domestic extremist cells, with simultaneous attacks planned across multiple states for this weekend." Harrison studied the intelligence summaries with the practiced eye of someone trained to identify critical patterns in complex data. The scope and sophistication of the threat immediately reminded him of operations he'd encountered in overseas theaters, where well-funded terrorist organizations had used hybrid tactics to achieve maximum impact with limited resources. "What specific intelligence do we have about operational timelines and target selection?" Harrison asked, flipping through documents that contained surveillance reports, communication intercepts, and technical analysis from multiple agencies. "Are we looking at random soft targets, or is there strategic selection that indicates specific objectives?" Mitchell consulted her secure tablet before responding. "That's our primary intelligence gap, Captain. We know the attacks are planned for this weekend, but we lack specific target information and operational details. Our analysts have been unable to intercept final coordination communications that would provide actionable intelligence for prevention efforts." "Voice identification capabilities?" Harrison inquired, knowing that terrorist operations at this level typically required coordination calls that could be intercepted and analyzed. "Do we have analysts capable of tracking specific operatives through their communication patterns?" "Limited capabilities, sir," Mitchell responded with obvious frustration. "We have standard voice recognition software, but the operatives appear to be using advanced counter-surveillance techniques that exceed our current analytical capabilities. Our technical personnel are working around the clock, but they're struggling with the sophistication of the terrorist communication methods." Harrison nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the challenge of tracking professionally trained operatives who understood how to avoid detection by conventional intelligence methods. His experience in overseas operations had taught him that the most dangerous terrorists were those who combined ideological motivation with technical expertise and professional training in counterintelligence techniques. "I'd like to review your communication monitoring setup," Harrison said, standing to follow Mitchell toward the main communications center. As they entered the communications center, Harrison's trained gaze swept across the room, taking in the electronic equipment, personnel assignments, and operational procedures with the analytical precision of someone who had commanded similar facilities in combat zones. His attention focused on individual specialists, assessing their stress levels, technical competence, and potential for contributing solutions that might not be obvious to their immediate supervisors. The captain's eyes lingered on Becca, who was working at a corner station equipped with advanced voice analysis equipment that exceeded the capabilities of other monitoring positions. Her workstation displayed multiple spectral analysis programs running simultaneously, with audio feeds from international communication intercepts that suggested specialized training in acoustic intelligence. But what caught Harrison's attention wasn't the technical sophistication of her equipment, it was her calm, focused demeanor amid the chaos surrounding her. While other personnel showed obvious signs of stress and uncertainty, Becca worked with the quiet confidence of someone who possessed critical information but lacked the authority to act on it. Harrison recognized that expression from his own early career, when junior officers sometimes possessed expertise that their superiors couldn't perceive or appreciate. "Colonel Mitchell," Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through bureaucratic obstacles. "I want to speak with every analyst who has specific intelligence about this threat.
Start with anyone who has voice identification capabilities or specialized training in terrorist communication analysis.
Mitchell began directing Harrison towards senior personnel who held supervisory positions within the communications center, but the captain held up his hand to stop the introductions. His instincts, honed by 3 decades of intelligence operations, were telling him that the most valuable information might not come from the most obvious sources. Instead, Harrison walked directly toward Becca's workstation, drawn by something indefinable about her focused intensity and the sophisticated nature of her technical setup. As he approached, he could hear fragments of audio that she was analyzing, voice samples that carried the distinctive characteristics of professional counter-surveillance techniques that he'd encountered in overseas operations. "Excuse me," Harrison said, stopping beside Becca's workstation and speaking in the direct manner of someone accustomed to cutting through military protocol when time was critical. "Captain Daniel Harrison, Intelligence Operations. I understand you're working on voice analysis related to the current threat." Becca looked up from her monitors with surprise, clearly startled that someone was actually speaking to her directly rather than looking through her as if she didn't exist. For a moment, she seemed uncertain whether Harrison was actually addressing her or speaking to someone else nearby. "Yes, sir," she responded carefully, her voice carrying the caution of someone who had learned not to assume that being noticed would lead to being heard. "Staff Sergeant Rebecca Coleman, Communications Intelligence Analyst. I've been tracking specific operatives related to the current threat." Harrison's expression sharpened with interest as he recognized the professional competence in her response. "What specific intelligence do you have about operational timelines and coordination patterns?" The question was exactly what Becca had been hoping someone would ask for the past 48 hours. She pulled up her analysis files on the main monitor, displaying the comprehensive intelligence package she'd compiled from Wednesday night's intercepts, along with follow-up analysis that showed correlation patterns with the current crisis. "Sir, I intercepted coordination communications Wednesday night involving 3 specific operatives," Becca began, her confidence growing as she realized Harrison was actually listening to her responses. "I've positively identified Victor Kozlov, codename Ghost 7, coordinating with previously unknown female and male operatives to plan coordinated attacks for this weekend." Harrison leaned forward, studying the technical analysis displayed on Becca's monitors with the intense focus of someone recognizing critical intelligence. The voice identification data showed sophistication that exceeded standard military training, while the operational analysis demonstrated understanding of terrorist tactics that indicated specialized education and experience. "Show me the voice signatures," Harrison commanded, his tone carrying the urgency of someone who understood the implications of what he was seeing. "I want to hear the actual intercepts and review your technical analysis of their coordination patterns." Becca began playing the audio files she'd recorded Wednesday night, providing real-time analysis of vocal patterns, stress indicators, and coded language that revealed operational details. As Ghost 7's voice emerged from the speakers with its distinctive rasp and precise pronunciation, Harrison's face went pale with recognition. "Jesus Christ," Harrison whispered, his professional composure cracking as he realized the significance of what he was hearing. "That's Ghost 7. We've been tracking him across 3 continents for 18 months. How long have you been monitoring his communications?" "6 months, sir," Becca responded, pulling up additional files that showed the extensive database she'd compiled on Ghost 7's operational patterns. "I've tracked him through multiple networks and identified his coordination methods with various terrorist cells. The Wednesday intercept was the first time I detected him working with domestic operatives." Harrison's mind raced as he processed the implications of Becca's discovery. Ghost 7 was considered one of the most dangerous terrorist coordinators in the world, someone whose involvement indicated an operation with international backing and professional-level planning. The fact that he was now working with domestic extremists represented a quantum leap in threat sophistication that exceeded anything in current intelligence assessments.
"Why wasn't this intelligence reported through proper channels?" Harrison demanded, his voice carrying the sharp edge of someone discovering critical information that should have prevented a crisis. Becca's expression showed the frustration and helplessness she'd experienced over the past 2 days. "Sir, I attempted to report it multiple times through various channels. I briefed Sergeant Chen, submitted electronic reports through the intelligence system, and contacted FBI counter-terrorism units directly. None of the reports were acknowledged or acted upon." Harrison turned toward Colonel Mitchell, who had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm. The colonel's face showed the dawning realization that critical intelligence had been available for 48 hours, but had somehow failed to reach decision-makers who could have acted on it. "Colonel Mitchell," Harrison said, his voice carrying a dangerous quiet that indicated barely controlled anger. "This analyst has been sitting on intelligence that could have prevented this entire crisis. Ghost 7's involvement changes everything about our threat assessment and response requirements." The communications center gradually fell silent as personnel became aware of the intense conversation taking place at Becca's workstation. Harrison's reputation preceded him, and when someone of his stature focused attention on a specific analyst, it usually meant that critical developments were emerging. "Staff Sergeant Coleman," Harrison continued, his voice now carrying the full authority of someone taking command of a crisis. "You are now the primary intelligence analyst for this operation. I want every piece of analysis you've compiled, every voice signature you've identified, and every operational assessment you've developed related to Ghost 7 and his coordination network." The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Personnel throughout the communications center suddenly became aware of Becca's presence and expertise, as if Harrison's recognition had somehow made her visible to everyone else. Technical specialists who had been struggling with voice identification challenges began gathering around her workstation, eager to learn from someone who had successfully tracked the primary targets they'd been unable to locate. "Furthermore," Harrison announced, his voice carrying across the entire communications center, "all personnel will follow Staff Sergeant Coleman's guidance regarding voice identification and operational analysis until this crisis is resolved. She has the most comprehensive intelligence about the primary threats, and her expertise will guide our response efforts." For the first time in her military career, Becca found herself at the center of a major operation, rather than invisible on its periphery. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but it was balanced by the relief of finally being recognized for the expertise she'd been developing throughout her entire career. As Harrison waited for her to begin briefing the assembled personnel, Becca realized that her voice would finally be heard when it mattered most. With Captain Harrison's authorization, Becca transformed the communications center into a precision instrument focused on tracking Ghost 7's terrorist network. Her first action was to reconfigure the monitoring systems to focus on specific frequency ranges and geographic areas where her analysis predicted final coordination calls would occur. The broad-spectrum approach that had been overwhelming their analytical capabilities was replaced by targeted surveillance that leveraged her intimate knowledge of the operative's communication patterns. "Rodriguez, I need you to monitor frequencies 7.125 through 7.20 MHz, specifically listening for the female operative I've designated Target Bravo. She uses a distinctive breathing pattern and tends to pause before tactical terminology. I'll send you her voice signature for reference."
The transformation in the room's dynamics was immediate and dramatic. Personnel who had been struggling with undefined monitoring assignments now received specific targets and technical parameters that made their work focused and productive. Instead of searching randomly through countless communication channels, they were hunting for known individuals using proven identification techniques. "Thompson, take the Northern Colorado monitoring array and focus on Ghost 7's backup communication protocols," Becca continued, pulling up technical specifications that showed alternative frequencies the terrorist coordinator used when primary channels were compromised. "He typically switches to shortwave bands during operational phases, and I've mapped his frequency selection patterns based on previous intercepts." Captain Harrison watched Becca's tactical coordination with the admiration of someone recognizing exceptional competence under pressure.
Her assignments demonstrated deep understanding of both technical capabilities and enemy operational procedures, combining theoretical knowledge with practical experience in ways that immediately improved their surveillance effectiveness. Within 30 minutes of taking operational control, Becca's targeted approach began producing results that had eluded the facility's previous broad-spectrum monitoring efforts. Her first breakthrough came when Specialist Williams detected communication fragments on a shortwave frequency that matched Ghost 7's backup protocols exactly as Becca had predicted. "Contact on frequency 14.230, Williams reported, his voice carrying excitement as he recognized the distinctive vocal patterns that Becca had trained him to identify. "Partial transmission, heavy encryption, but the voice signature matches Ghost 7's profile. Duration 17 seconds before signal termination." Becca immediately shifted to Williams' monitoring station, putting on headphones to analyze the transmission personally, while her fingers flew across acoustic analysis software that could extract maximum information from minimal audio samples. The brief communication contained only fragments, but her trained ear could identify stress patterns and background audio that provided crucial operational intelligence. "Ghost 7 is definitely in the final coordination phase," Becca announced after completing her analysis. "Voice stress indicates he's operating under time pressure, and background audio suggests an urban environment with specific acoustic characteristics. I'm detecting automotive traffic patterns consistent with major metropolitan areas, most likely Denver, based on ambient frequency signatures." Captain Harrison immediately activated secure communication lines to FBI field offices in Denver, relaying Becca's analysis to tactical teams that had been searching the city without specific location intelligence. Her acoustic analysis provided the first concrete lead about Ghost 7's operational location, enabling law enforcement to focus their resources on specific geographic areas rather than conducting citywide searches. "FBI Denver, this is Fort Carson Communications," Harrison spoke into his secure handset. "We have confirmed audio intelligence placing Ghost 7 in your operational area. Acoustic analysis suggests urban environments with heavy traffic patterns, likely downtown or major commercial districts. Recommend immediate tactical deployment to areas matching those audio characteristics." The response from Denver field agents was immediate and grateful. They had been operating with outdated intelligence and general threat assessments, struggling to locate suspects who seemed to disappear whenever surveillance teams got close to their positions. Becca's specific location intelligence gave them the first actionable targeting information they'd received since the crisis began. But Becca's most significant breakthrough came at 01:27 hours Saturday morning, when her monitoring systems detected the transmission she'd been anticipating since Wednesday night. Ghost 7 initiated a final coordination call with his operational teams, using encrypted communication protocols that would have been invisible to conventional surveillance, but perfectly matched the patterns she'd identified during months of careful analysis. "All stations, priority intercept on frequency 21.145, Becca announced, her voice carrying across the communications center with urgent authority. "Ghost 7 is initiating final operational coordination. This is the call we've been waiting for. I need complete audio capture and real-time analysis on all participating voices." The communications center focused with laser intensity as multiple monitoring stations locked on to the coordination call that would reveal the exact timing and targets of the planned attacks. Becca coordinated the intercept like a conductor leading a complex orchestra, directing technical specialists to capture different aspects of the communication, while she provided real-time analysis of the tactical information being revealed. Ghost 7's voice carried the calm precision of someone delivering final operational orders to subordinates who understood their roles completely. But to Becca's trained ear, his communication revealed far more than surface-level coordination. Voice stress analysis indicated he's operating under external pressure, possibly from sponsors who demanded specific results within narrow timeframes. "Target Alpha will execute at 1400 hours, Ghost 7's voice emerged clearly, using coded language that referred to the female operative Becca had designated as Target Bravo. "Shopping complex, north entrance, maximum civilian density period. Prepare for immediate extraction following package delivery." Becca's blood ran cold as she realized the first attack was planned for Saturday afternoon at a major shopping center during peak weekend hours. The timing was calculated to maximize casualties among families and children who would be shopping for weekend activities, a target selection that demonstrated the calculated cruelty of professionally planned terrorism. Target Beta, confirm 14:30 hours sports facility execution, Ghost 7 continued, his voice maintaining professional calm while delivering orders for mass murder. South parking structure, focus on family section crowd density. Coordinate with Alpha for sequential impact timing. The second target was even more horrifying, a sports facility where children's soccer games were scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The terrorists had specifically identified the family section where parents and siblings would be watching games, planning to attack when defensive capabilities would be minimal and casualties would include the maximum number of children. Target Gamma maintained 1,500 hours government facility timeline, Ghost 7 concluded his coordination call. Federal building, employee entrance, avoid security checkpoint positioning. Execute regardless of alpha and beta outcomes. The third target was the federal building in downtown Denver, chosen for its symbolic value and the political impact that attacking government facilities would create. The sequential timing of the three attacks was designed to overwhelm law enforcement response capabilities, ensuring that emergency services would be responding to the first two attacks when the third occurred. As the coordination call ended, Becca had obtained complete operational intelligence about all three planned attacks: specific targets, precise timing, tactical approaches, and coordination methods. Her voice identification expertise had provided law enforcement with everything needed to prevent the most sophisticated terrorist operation ever attempted on American soil. "Captain Harrison," Becca called out, her voice carrying the weight of someone delivering information that could save hundreds of lives. "I have complete operational details on all three planned attacks. Shopping center at 1400 hours, sports facility at 1430, federal building at 1500. All locations in Denver, all timed for maximum civilian casualties." Harrison immediately activated multiple secure communication lines simultaneously, coordinating with FBI tactical teams, local law enforcement, and military response units to deploy resources that could intercept the terrorist operatives before they reach their targets. Becca's intelligence provided exactly the information needed to transform a reactive crisis response into proactive prevention operations. "FBI Denver, immediate tactical deployment required," Harrison transmitted over secure channels. "We have confirmed targets and timing for coordinated attacks beginning 1400 hours local time. Northgate Shopping Center, Riverside Sports Complex, and Federal Building downtown. This is actionable intelligence requiring immediate response." But Becca's expertise proved even more valuable when she detected additional communication that revealed the terrorists' extraction plans and backup contingencies. Her analysis of background audio and communication timing indicated that Ghost 7 had positioned additional operatives in reserve roles, ready to execute alternative attacks if the primary operations were compromised. "Sir, there's more," Becca announced as she continued analyzing the intercepted communications. "Audio analysis indicates Ghost 7 has backup operatives positioned at secondary targets. If law enforcement prevents the primary attacks, they have contingency plans for alternative locations. I'm detecting references to transportation hubs and educational facilities that suggest broader targeting options." This intelligence was crucial for preventing the terrorists from simply switching to alternative targets when they discovered that law enforcement was aware of their primary plans. Harrison immediately coordinated with tactical commanders to position resources that could respond to backup targets while maintaining coverage of the primary locations. The next 4 hours became a carefully choreographed operation that combined Becca's ongoing voice intelligence with tactical deployments across Denver. Her monitoring systems tracked Ghost 7's communications as he coordinated with his operatives, providing real-time intelligence about their movements and any changes to their operational plans. At 06:30 hours, FBI tactical teams intercepted the female operative designated as Target Bravo as she conducted final surveillance of Northgate Shopping Center.
The arrest was clean and quiet, preventing her from alerting other members of the terrorist cell while providing law enforcement with physical evidence that confirmed Becca's intelligence analysis. By 800 hours, tactical teams had located and arrested the male operative responsible for the sports facility attack, catching him during final preparation activities that included reconnaissance of security measures and crowd density patterns. His capture eliminated the second attack while providing additional intelligence about the cell's operational methods. The most challenging arrest came at 1000 hours when tactical teams attempted to apprehend Ghost 7 himself near the federal building. The experienced operative had detected law enforcement surveillance and attempted to escape using counter-surveillance techniques that had worked in previous operations. But Becca's real-time voice monitoring allowed tactical teams to track his communications with backup operatives, ultimately leading to his capture before he could execute the third attack or coordinate with reserve personnel. By 1200 hours Saturday, all three primary targets had been secured, the terrorist operatives were in custody, and additional arrests had rounded up the backup personnel who might have attempted alternative attacks. The most sophisticated terrorist operation ever planned against American targets had been completely neutralized through the combination of Becca's voice identification expertise and tactical coordination by law enforcement agencies. Captain Harrison stood in the communications center surrounded by secure phones that carried congratulations from agencies across the government, but his attention remained focused on Becca, whose specialized abilities had made the entire operation possible. The young analyst who had been invisible to her colleagues 48 hours earlier had become the central figure in preventing what could have been the deadliest terrorist attack in American history. "Outstanding work, Staff Sergeant Coleman," Harrison said, his voice parrying the genuine respect of someone who had witnessed exceptional performance under pressure. "Your voice identification expertise and operational analysis prevented a catastrophe that could have killed hundreds of innocent people. This is exactly why we invest in specialized training and why we need to listen to our most capable analysts regardless of their rank or visibility within the chain of command." As reports continued arriving about successful arrests and prevented attacks, Becca realized that her unique abilities had finally been recognized and utilized in exactly the way her training had prepared her for. The voice that had been invisible for months had become the instrument that saved countless lives and prevented a national tragedy. The Monday morning briefing at Fort Carson bore no resemblance to the routine gatherings that had defined Becca's previous 8 months at the facility. The secure conference room buzzed with energy as personnel from multiple agencies gathered to conduct the after-action review of what intelligence analysts were already calling the most successful counterterrorism operation in decades. Representatives from the FBI, CIA, NSA, and Department of Homeland Security filled seats normally occupied only by local communications personnel, their presence testament to the national significance of the weekend's events. Becca entered the conference room to find her usual back corner seat occupied by a deputy director from the National Security Agency who was reviewing classified files that bore her name and analysis signature. Instead, Captain Harrison directed her to the front of the room where a chair had been positioned at the head table between senior officials whose combined experience represented centuries of intelligence operations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harrison began, addressing the assembled group with the formal tone reserved for briefings that would become part of official military history. "Today's after-action review focuses on the prevention of coordinated terrorist attacks through exceptional voice intelligence analysis performed by Staff Sergeant Rebecca Coleman. Her expertise and dedication prevented what could have been the deadliest attack on American soil since 9/11. The transformation in how people perceived Becca was immediately obvious. Instead of the blank stares and absent recognition that had characterized every previous briefing, she found herself the focus of intense professional attention from some of the most experienced intelligence professionals in the country. Deputy Director Sandra Walsh from the NSA leaned forward to study Becca with the analytical gaze of someone evaluating exceptional talent. "Staff Sergeant Coleman," Walsh began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years identifying and developing intelligence assets. Your technical analysis of Ghost 7's communication patterns represents the most sophisticated voice identification work we've seen in recent operations. The NSA would like to discuss expanding your role in our international counterterrorism programs. The offer represented the kind of career opportunity that most intelligence analysts could only dream about. The NSA's international programs involved the most sensitive and challenging assignments in the intelligence community, working with assets and operations that exist at the highest levels of classification. But for Becca, the most meaningful aspect of the offer was the recognition that her abilities were being acknowledged by people who understood their true value. Colonel Mitchell, who had struggled to utilize Becca's expertise during the crisis, now addressed her with respect due to someone whose contributions had prevented a national catastrophe. The colonel's expression showed a mixture of professional admiration and personal reflection about the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its source within the military hierarchy. Staff Sergeant Coleman, Mitchell said, consulting official documents that outlined recommended commendations and career advancement opportunities. Based on your performance during this crisis, I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Technical Sergeant and assignment to the Pentagon's Joint Counterterrorism Center. Your voice identification expertise is exactly what our national security apparatus needs to combat evolving terrorist threats. The Pentagon assignment represented validation that extended far beyond personal recognition. The Joint Counterterrorism Center coordinates intelligence operations across all branches of government, working on the most critical threats facing American interests worldwide. Assignment to that level of operations meant that Becca's voice would be heard by decision-makers at the highest levels of national security. FBI Special Agent Michael Torres, who had coordinated the tactical operations that prevented the Denver attacks, provided additional perspective on the operational impact of Becca's intelligence analysis. His briefing detailed how her voice identification work had enabled precise tactical deployments that minimized risk to civilians while ensuring successful arrests of all terrorist operatives. The briefing continued with technical presentations that detailed how Becca's voice identification methods could be integrated into broader intelligence operations to enhance national counterterrorism capabilities. Specialists from multiple agencies discussed adopting her analytical techniques for their own operations, recognizing that her approach represented a significant advancement in voice intelligence methodology.
Dr. Patricia Chen, a technical specialist from the CIA's Science and Technology Directorate, presented an analysis showing how Becca's voice identification accuracy exceeded their most advanced automated systems by margins that suggested her human expertise provided capabilities that technology couldn't replicate. The presentation included recommendations for incorporating human voice analysts with Becca's level of training into critical intelligence operations. The precision demonstrated by Staff Sergeant Coleman in identifying specific operatives under challenging acoustic conditions suggests that human expertise remains irreplaceable in certain types of intelligence analysis, Dr. Chen explained. Her ability to detect stress patterns, emotional states, and deception indicators through voice analysis provides tactical advantages that our automated systems cannot achieve. But the most significant transformation came when Technical Sergeant Chen, who had been unable to perceive Becca's existence during 8 months of working in the same facility, approached her after the briefing with a formal apology and request for professional guidance. The same supervisor who had overlooked her critical intelligence reports now sought her expertise for improving the facility's voice analysis capabilities. Staff Sergeant Coleman, Chen began, his voice carrying genuine humility as he acknowledged his previous failures to recognize her contributions. I want to formally apologize for not recognizing your expertise and for failing to act on your intelligence reports. I'd like to request that you train our personnel in advanced voice identification techniques before your reassignment to Pentagon operations. The apology represented more than personal acknowledgement. It demonstrated institutional recognition that competence and expertise should be valued regardless of their source within military hierarchies. Chen's request for training showed that Becca's methods would continue benefiting the facility's operations even after her promotion to higher-level assignments. The transformation extended beyond professional recognition to include personal relationships within the military community. Soldiers who had been unable to see her during routine operations now approached her with requests for guidance about intelligence careers and specialized training opportunities. Her invisibility had been replaced by visibility that bordered on celebrity status within the intelligence community. Specialist Davis, the young communications technician who had smirked during her invisible roll call experience, now sought her mentorship for developing his own voice analysis skills. His transformation from dismissive colleague to eager student reflected broader changes in how military personnel were learning to recognize and value diverse types of expertise. Staff Sergeant Coleman, Davis said during a private conversation after the briefing, "I want to apologize for my behavior during previous briefings. I didn't understand the importance of your work or the level of expertise you brought to our operations. I'd be honored if you could provide guidance about developing my own technical capabilities." The personal apologies and requests for mentorship demonstrated that Becca's transformation had created ripple effects throughout the military community. Her example was teaching others about the importance of recognizing diverse forms of expertise and the dangers of overlooking capabilities based on superficial judgments about rank, visibility, or conventional expectations. Captain Harrison pulled Becca aside for a private conversation that would define the next phase of her military career. His expression carried the satisfaction of someone who had successfully identified and developed exceptional talent under challenging circumstances, but also the forward-looking focus of someone planning how to maximize that talent's future contributions. Staff Sergeant Coleman, Harrison began, using her new rank for the first time. "Your performance during this crisis demonstrates exactly the type of expertise our intelligence community needs to combat evolving threats. But I want to discuss something beyond your Pentagon assignment: the possibility of establishing a new program that trains analysts in advanced voice identification techniques based on your methods." The proposal represented institutional change that could transform how the military approached voice intelligence operations. Instead of relying on automated systems and conventional analysis techniques, Harrison envisioned training programs that developed human expertise to levels that matched Becca's natural abilities and specialized education. The program would be based at the Defense Intelligence Agency's training facility in Virginia, Harrison continued. "You would design the curriculum, select candidates, and establish standards that ensure our analysts can achieve the level of performance you demonstrated during this operation. It would be a permanent assignment, with promotion opportunities that reflect the program's importance to national security." The opportunity represented the ultimate validation of Becca's expertise, the chance to share her knowledge with new generations of analysts while continuing to contribute to operations at the highest levels of intelligence work. It meant that her voice would continue to be heard, not just in individual operations, but in shaping how the intelligence community approached one of its most critical capabilities. 3 weeks later, Becca stood in the same conference room where she had been invisible during countless briefings, but now she was addressing senior officials from across the intelligence community about establishing the new voice analysis training program. Her audience included people whose decisions would affect national security operations for years to come, and they were listening to every word with the attention due to someone whose expertise had prevented a national catastrophe. "The program will focus on developing human capabilities that complement rather than replace technological systems," Becca explained to the assembled officials. "Voice identification requires understanding cultural nuances, emotional states, and deception indicators that automated systems cannot reliably detect. Our goal is training analysts who can provide the human expertise that technology cannot replicate." As she concluded her presentation, Becca reflected on the transformation that had taken her from invisible analyst to recognized expert whose voice would help shape the future of intelligence operations. The conference room that had once been filled with people who couldn't see her was now occupied by officials who hung on every word, understanding that her expertise represented capabilities they couldn't afford to overlook or underestimate. Her voice, which had been silent for so long, would now be heard at the highest levels of government for as long as she chose to serve. Walking out of Fort Carson for the last time, Becca carried orders assigning her to the Defense Intelligence Agency with responsibilities that would utilize her expertise at levels she had never imagined possible. The transformation was complete, from invisible analyst to recognized expert whose voice would help protect American lives around the world. The girl who had once been mocked during roll call was now the woman whose voice would train the next generation of intelligence professionals, ensuring that critical expertise would never again go unrecognized when lives hung in the balance. As she drove toward her new assignment and future responsibilities, Becca understood that her transformation represented more than personal success. It demonstrated the importance of institutional cultures that recognize and develop talent regardless of its source, ensuring that the voices of expertise are always heard when they matter most. The media attention surrounding the prevented attacks created additional opportunities for Becca to influence how the intelligence community approached voice analysis operations. CNN's Anderson Cooper invited her for an exclusive interview about the technical aspects of counterterrorism intelligence, while The Washington Post featured her story as an example of how individual expertise could prevent national catastrophe when properly recognized and utilized. During the CNN interview, conducted in a secure studio with appropriate classification restrictions, Becca explained how voice identification techniques could be applied to broader security challenges facing American interests worldwide. Her appearance marked the first time that operational voice analysts had been permitted to discuss their methods publicly, reflecting the unprecedented nature of her contributions to national security. Voice analysis provides insights into human behavior that technology alone cannot achieve. Understanding cultural nuances, detecting deception patterns, and identifying emotional states requires human expertise that complements our technological capabilities. The combination of human analysis and advanced systems creates intelligence capabilities that exceed what either approach could accomplish independently.
The interview generated widespread interest in voice analysis careers among young people considering military service, with recruitment offices reporting significant increases in inquiries about intelligence specialties. Becca's visibility was inspiring a new generation of analysts who understood that technical expertise could lead to meaningful contributions to national security regardless of their background or initial visibility within military hierarchies. The Washington Post profile, written by investigative journalist Sarah Martinez, detailed how institutional blindness had nearly prevented the most successful counterterrorism operation in recent history. The article examined systemic issues within military organizations that could cause critical expertise to be overlooked, using Becca's experience as a case study for broader institutional reforms. Staff Sergeant Coleman's story illustrates both the potential and the risks within our national security apparatus, Martinez wrote. Her expertise was always present and available, but institutional failures nearly prevented that expertise from being utilized when lives depended on it. The successful prevention of the Denver attacks occurred not because our systems worked perfectly, but because exceptional individuals like Captain Harrison recognized talent that others had overlooked. The article prompted congressional hearings about military personnel evaluation systems and the importance of identifying specialized expertise regardless of conventional promotion patterns or visibility within traditional command structures. Senator Patricia Williams, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, announced investigations into how military organizations could better recognize and utilize technical specialists whose contributions might not fit standard evaluation criteria. The Coleman case demonstrates that our most critical capabilities sometimes exist in unexpected places within our military structure, Senator Williams announced during committee hearings. We need evaluation systems that identify and develop technical expertise before crises reveal what we should have recognized all along. Becca testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee about her experiences and recommendations for improving how military organizations identify and develop specialized capabilities. Her testimony provided specific examples of institutional barriers that could prevent critical expertise from being recognized and utilized effectively during emergency situations. Senators, my experience suggests that we need evaluation systems focused on technical competence rather than conventional visibility metrics. Critical expertise often develops in specialists who work independently on complex problems, but those individuals may not be visible through traditional command structures.
We need deliberate efforts to identify and develop such capabilities before they're needed during crises. Her recommendations led to the establishment of the Technical Excellence Recognition Program, a military-wide initiative designed to identify specialists whose expertise might not be apparent through conventional evaluation processes. The program created pathways for technical specialists to gain recognition and advancement based on competence rather than traditional leadership metrics. The Defense Intelligence Agency's new voice analysis training program officially launched 6 months after Becca's Pentagon assignment, with her serving as both curriculum developer and chief instructor. The program attracted candidates from all branches of military service, along with analysts from civilian intelligence agencies who recognized the value of enhanced human voice identification capabilities. Major Jennifer Chen, Becca's former supervisor who had been promoted and assigned as the program's administrative director, worked closely with her to establish training standards that balanced theoretical education with practical application. Their collaboration represented institutional learning about the importance of supporting rather than overlooking technical expertise. Working with Becca has taught me more about leadership than my previous 20 years of military service, Major Chen reflected during the program's graduation ceremony. Real leadership means recognizing and supporting expertise wherever it exists, rather than expecting expertise to conform to conventional expectations about visibility and rank. The first graduating class of the Advanced Voice Analysis program included analysts who would be assigned to critical intelligence operations worldwide, carrying Becca's methodologies to facilities across the globe. Their training represented institutional multiplication of the expertise that had prevented the Denver attacks, ensuring that similar capabilities would be available for future counterterrorism operations. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, the program's top graduate, exemplified the new generation of voice analysts who understood both the technical aspects of their work and its strategic importance to national security operations. During her graduation speech, Rodriguez credited Becca with demonstrating that technical excellence could create opportunities for meaningful contribution regardless of initial organizational recognition. Staff Sergeant Coleman's example shows us that expertise combined with persistence can overcome institutional barriers and create lasting change, Rodriguez told her fellow graduates. Our responsibility is continuing that example by developing our own capabilities to levels that serve our national security mission effectively. International intelligence partnerships also expanded based on recognition of American voice analysis capabilities demonstrated during the Denver Operation Prevention. Allied nations requested training partnerships that would share Becca's methodologies with their own intelligence services, creating collaborative programs that enhanced global counterterrorism capabilities. The British Government Communications Headquarters invited Becca to establish voice analysis training programs for their Middle Eastern operations, while the Australian Defence Intelligence Organization requested consulting support for developing similar capabilities within their Pacific region security operations. These international partnerships reflected growing recognition of American expertise in human voice intelligence analysis. During a classified briefing with international partners at the Pentagon, Becca outlined how voice analysis techniques could be adapted for different cultural and linguistic contexts while maintaining effectiveness against sophisticated terrorist communication methods. Her presentation demonstrated that human expertise could be systematically developed and shared across allied intelligence organizations. Voice analysis principles apply universally, but effective implementation requires understanding cultural and linguistic nuances specific to each operational environment, Becca explained to international intelligence representatives. Training programs must balance standardized methodologies with contextual adaptation that reflects regional operational requirements. The success of international training partnerships led to the establishment of the Global Voice Intelligence Consortium, an allied intelligence sharing arrangement that coordinated voice analysis operations across multiple countries. Becca served as technical advisor for the consortium, ensuring that shared methodologies maintained effectiveness while respecting each nation's operational security requirements. Personal recognition continued expanding as Becca received commendations from multiple government agencies and civilian organizations that understood the significance of her contributions to preventing terrorist attacks. The Director of National Intelligence presented her with the National Intelligence Medal of Achievement, while the American Intelligence Officers Association honored her with their annual Technical Excellence Award. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from families whose lives had been saved by her work. Parents whose children would have been at the targeted soccer games wrote letters thanking her for preventing attacks that could have devastated their communities. Shopping center employees expressed gratitude for intelligence work that had protected both customers and staff from terrorist violence. One letter particularly moved Becca, written by Maria Santos, a mother whose 8-year-old daughter played soccer at the Riverside Sports Complex that had been targeted. Staff Sergeant Coleman, my daughter Sophia doesn't understand what you prevented, but I want her to know that heroes like you exist. Thank you for using your voice to protect children who don't yet have voices strong enough to protect themselves.
These personal connections reminded Becca that technical expertise served human purposes, protecting individuals and families whose lives could be destroyed by terrorist violence. The abstract nature of intelligence work sometimes obscured its human impact, but direct contact with people whose lives had been saved provided a clear perspective on why her voice needed to be heard and recognized. 5 years after the Denver operation, Becca was promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned a senior technical advisor for the National Security Agency's Global Voice Intelligence operations. Her responsibilities included overseeing voice analysis operations worldwide while continuing to develop training programs that ensured American intelligence capabilities remained superior to evolving terrorist communication methods. The transformation from invisible analyst to recognized expert had created ripple effects throughout the intelligence community that continued expanding years after her initial breakthrough. Young analysts entering military service understood that technical excellence could create meaningful career opportunities, while senior leaders recognized the importance of identifying and developing specialized expertise before crises revealed its critical value. Standing in her NSA office overlooking the Potomac River, Becca reflected on a journey that had taken her from invisible frustration to recognized expertise whose voice influenced national security operations at the highest levels. The same abilities that had been overlooked during routine roll calls now guided intelligence operations that protected American interests worldwide. Her story had become an institutional memory within the intelligence community, a reminder that critical capabilities often existed in unexpected places and that effective leadership required deliberate efforts to recognize and develop such expertise. The voice that had once been silent during crisis situations now spoke with authority that shaped how America defended itself against evolving threats. The girl who had been mocked during military briefings had become the woman whose voice trained analysts, influenced policy, and prevented attacks that could have changed American history. Her transformation demonstrated that persistence combined with excellence would ultimately be recognized, even when recognition required overcoming institutional barriers that seemed insurmountable. Most importantly, Becca's journey proved that individual voices could create lasting change when they carried expertise that served purposes larger than personal recognition. Her voice had saved lives, influenced institutions, and inspired others to develop their own capabilities in service of protecting the nation and its values. The recognition she had earned would echo through generations of analysts who understood that their voices mattered when they spoke with knowledge, dedication, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.